Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. Jacob first met his future wife, Sarah, through a mutual friend from university. At the time, Sarah seemed like just another reserved girl lingering by the punch bowl at a campus party, and Jacob barely noticed her. But a month later, they ran into each other at a cozy alumni gathering in a dimly lit cafe in Portland. This time, something clicked. Sarah was sharp, tossing out references to Vonnegut and Gaiman with ease, her quiet confidence and quirky charm pulling Jacob in like gravity. He was used to quick-witted banter, but her blend of intellect and warmth was disarming. By the end of the night, swept up in a rush of adrenaline, he half joked, half pleaded, "Marry me, Sarah. I'm serious. Let's build a life, the whole deal, rings and promises." To his shock, Sarah's eyes lit up, and she said yes before he could backpedal. She later admitted she'd been hoping for those exact words since their first conversation. Their wedding was intimate, a backyard affair in Seattle filled with fairy lights, shared stories, and laughter that echoed into the early hours. 4 months after, Jacob and Sarah would sprawl on their worn-in couch, flipping through Polaroids from that night, marveling at how a single day could feel so flawless. Long before the vows, Sarah had walked Jacob through her sprawling family history, including a distant cousin named Ryan. She couldn't quite pin down how Ryan fit into the family puzzle. Third cousin, maybe, but her dad called him son, so Jacob never questioned the connection. Sarah and Ryan were inseparable, like siblings who'd grown up sharing secrets. They'd hit coffee shops, binge-watch old sci-fi flicks, or do late-night yoga in Sarah's living room while Jacob dozed nearby. Truth be told, Jacob bristled at how much time Sarah spent with Ryan. It wasn't just the hours, it was the ease, the way they'd laugh over some inside joke from their childhood, like the time Ryan accidentally sprayed Sarah with a garden hose during a summer barbecue. Sarah's sisters, on the other hand, couldn't stand Ryan. They'd smirk and toss shade whenever he showed up, calling him Mr. Golden Boy behind his back. Yet Sarah would talk about Ryan for hours, his goofy pranks, their shared memories, the way he'd been there for her when she was a kid. "He's family, babe," she'd say, brushing off Jacob's grumbling. "You're overthinking it." But to Jacob, Ryan wasn't just family. He was a guy who was always around, too close, too often. "Maybe he's just Ryan to you," Jacob snapped once. "But to me, he's some dude who's practically living in our house." Sarah would always counter with the same story. When she was 10, her mom took in Ryan, the kid of an overworked distant cousin who was juggling multiple jobs. That summer, Sarah and Ryan became thick as thieves, and the bond stuck. Jacob tried to let it go, but the constant Ryan that wore him down like a song stuck on repeat. Then his job at the warehouse turned chaotic. A massive inventory mix-up meant Jacob was pulling 14-hour shifts, haggling with vendors, and pleading with the night crew to stay late. His time with Sarah shrank to fleeting moments, catching her at breakfast before he left or finding her already asleep when he dragged himself home at midnight. One foggy Tuesday morning, Jacob shuffled into the kitchen and noticed 2 coffee mugs in the sink, lipstick smudged on one. "Celebrating something without me?" he asked, half teasing, half wary. Sarah grinned, oblivious to his tone. "Ryan stopped by. He landed a big client at work, so we had a quick toast." Jacob's jaw tightened. The image of Sarah and Ryan clinking mugs burned into his brain, looping like a bad movie. He didn't say anything, but the seed of doubt was planted. At work, a colleague named Mike picked up on Jacob's mood and asked point blank, "You sure this Ryan guy's just a cousin?" The question hit like a spark in dry grass. Jacob laughed it off, insisting it couldn't be anything more. Sarah would never. But the words lingered, gnawing at him. That night, he found himself scrolling through articles with titles like "When Family Feels Too Close," each one tightening the knot in his chest. The doubt festered in Jacob like a splinter he couldn't dig out. Every time Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Ryan, her face would light up and Jacob's stomach would twist. He'd catch himself staring at her, wondering if he was paranoid or if the clues were screaming at him. One evening, while folding laundry, he pulled out a pair of boxer briefs that weren't his, navy blue with a loud, geometric pattern. His heart thudded as he held them up. "Sarah," he called, voice tight, "whose are these?" She glanced over from the couch, mid-sip of tea, and rolled her eyes. Ryan's. His washing machine broke, so I did a load for him. Must have missed those. Jacob's grip on the fabric tightened. Laundry? Sarah? Really? We've talked about boundaries, and this is way over the line. Her expression hardened. So I'm supposed to tell family no? He's not my brother, Jacob. He was there for me when I was a kid. The argument escalated, voices climbing until they were shouting over each other. For the first time in their marriage, they slept apart. Sarah in their bed, Jacob on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment he'd ever seen Ryan and Sarah together. The next morning, Sarah slid a mug of black coffee across the counter, her version of a truce. I don't want to fight about Ryan, she said softly. He's family. You know that. Jacob nodded, but the gesture was hollow. The coffee tasted bitter, and the knot in his gut didn't loosen. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust the story she'd told 100 times about Ryan being the cousin who'd shown up one summer and never really left. But Mike's question from work kept echoing. You sure he's just a cousin? Jacob started noticing things he'd brushed off before. How Ryan's hand lingered on Sarah's shoulder when he said goodbye. How their hug seemed to last a beat too long. He hated himself for thinking it, but he couldn't stop. Weeks passed, and Jacob's work schedule didn't let up. The warehouse was still a mess, and he was drowning in emails, meetings, and late-night inventory counts. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to fill the gaps with Ryan. Jacob would come home to find takeout containers for two, or he'd overhear Sarah giggling on the phone, saying, "No, you're ridiculous, Ryan. Stop it." Each time, Jacob swallowed his irritation, but it was like swallowing glass. One night, he couldn't hold it in. "Does Ryan ever go home?" he snapped after finding a pair of Ryan's sneakers by the door. Sarah's eyes flashed. "He's family, Jacob. I'm not going to push him away because you're feeling insecure." The word insecure stung, like she'd slapped him. He stormed out to the balcony, letting the cold Seattle air bite at his skin, wondering how his marriage had turned into a battlefield. Then came a rare Friday, when Jacob's boss let him leave early. He felt a spark of hope, like he could reclaim some of the magic he and Sarah used to have. He stopped by her favorite bakery in Capitol Hill, grabbing a box of lavender macarons and a bouquet of daisies. Sarah had texted earlier that she was taking a lazy day, probably still in her pajamas, binge-watching some new series. Jacob grinned, imagining her face when he surprised her. But as he pulled into their apartment complex, his heart sank. Ryan's silver Jeep was parked in the guest spot. Jacob's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Not again. He told himself it was nothing. Ryan probably just popped by for coffee, like always. But the flowers felt heavy in his hand, the macarons a naive gesture. He climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, the key shaking slightly as he unlocked the door. The living room was empty, the TV off. Silence, except for a faint sound from the bedroom. A rhythmic creak, unmistakable. Jacob's pulse roared in his ears. The macarons slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. In 4 strides, he was at the bedroom door. He pushed it open, and the world tilted. There was Sarah, astride Ryan, her face frozen in shock as their eyes met. Ryan was sprawled beneath her, shirtless, his expression a mix of panic and guilt. Jacob's vision tunneled. Without a word, he lunged, yanking Sarah off. She stumbled, gasping, as her arm hit the nightstand with a crack. Then he turned to Ryan, fists clenched, and let loose. A voice in his head whispered, "You've wanted to do this for years." Blood bloomed on Ryan's cheek. His lips split, but Jacob didn't stop. The air in the apartment was thick with silence after the fight, broken only by Sarah's muffled sobs and Ryan's ragged breathing as he clutched his bruised face. Jacob stood over him, fist still balled, chest heaving, the adrenaline souring into something cold and heavy. Sarah scrambled to her feet, clutching a sheet to her chest, her eyes wide with a mix of shame and defiance. "Jacob, please," she choked out, but he didn't look at her. He couldn't. Instead, he grabbed Ryan by the collar, dragging him toward the door. "Get out," he growled, shoving him into the hallway. Ryan didn't argue, just stumbled out, blood dripping on his shirt. The door slammed shut, and Jacob turned to Sarah, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. "How long?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp. She shook her head, lips trembling. "It wasn't like that, Jacob. It just happened." The words felt like a blade twisting in his gut. He didn't wait for more. He grabbed his keys and left. The image of Sarah and Ryan burned into his mind like a brand. By morning, Jacob was at Sarah's parents' house in Tacoma, his hands still sore from the night before. He sat at their kitchen table, the same one where he'd once carved pumpkins with Sarah's dad during their first Thanksgiving together. Now, he laid out the whole ugly scene, his voice flat, as if recounting someone else's nightmare. Sarah's mom, Ellen, crumpled into a chair, her hands covering her face. "How do I even look at her now?" she whispered, tears spilling over. Her dad, Tom, just rested a heavy hand on Jacob's shoulder, his eyes glistening but silent. They didn't defend Sarah, didn't make excuses, and that silence spoke louder than any words. Jacob felt a strange mix of validation and nausea. He'd always known Ryan was trouble, but this was betrayal on a level he hadn't braced for. Going back home wasn't an option. Jacob crashed at a coworker's place, sleeping on a lumpy futon that smelled faintly of beer. His phone buzzed with text from Sarah. "I'm sorry, can we talk?" "Please, Jacob," but he didn't respond. Each message felt like a plea for absolution he wasn't ready to give. Instead, he threw himself into work, letting the chaos of the warehouse swallow him. The long hours were a mercy, keeping his mind from replaying the bedroom scene on a loop. But at night, alone, the questions clawed at him. How long had it been going on? Was Ryan really just a cousin, or had that been a lie from the start? He remembered Sarah's stories about their childhood, the way she'd laugh about Ryan teaching her to ride a bike or sneaking her candy during family picnics. Had it all been a cover, or had something shifted over time? A week later, Sarah showed up at the warehouse during his lunch break, her eyes red and puffy. She stood by his truck, arms crossed, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ryan and I, it wasn't planned. It was a mistake, a stupid, horrible mistake." Jacob leaned against the truck, arms folded, his jaw tight. "A mistake," he said, his voice cold. "You were in our bed, Sarah. Our bed." She flinched but didn't back down. "I know I messed up, but Ryan's family, Jacob. He's been in my life forever. It wasn't about love or replacing you. It was, I don't know, comfort, maybe, a moment of weakness." Jacob laughed, a bitter sound. "Comfort? You think that makes this better?" He walked away before she could answer, her voice calling after him, but he didn't turn back. Days turned into weeks, and Jacob moved into a cheap studio apartment, the kind with thin walls and a leaky faucet. He heard through Sarah's sister that she'd moved in with Ryan, a choice that felt like a fresh betrayal. "She's lost her mind," her sister said over coffee, her voice dripping with disgust. "Ryan's always been a leech, and now this." Jacob nodded, but the words didn't soothe him. He kept imagining Sarah and Ryan together, rebuilding the life he thought was his. He stopped checking her texts, stopped looking at her social media, but the pain didn't fade. It was like a bruise that throbbed with every step. Then, one rainy afternoon, Jacob got a call from Sarah's dad. "She's not doing great," Tom said, his voice heavy. "Ryan's moving on. Says he's engaged to someone else. Wants Sarah out by the end of the week." Jacob's first instinct was to say it wasn't his problem, but something in Tom's tone stopped him. "She's alone, Jacob. Really alone." The words hung there, stirring something he thought he'd buried. Concern, maybe, or the ghost of love he'd once felt. He hung up, staring out at the rain, wondering if Sarah was as broken as he was. Jacob sat in his dim studio apartment, the rain drumming against the window, Tom's words echoing in his head. "She's alone, Jacob. Really alone." He wanted to feel vindicated, to let Sarah drown in the mess she'd made. But a pang of something, pity, maybe, or the stubborn remnants of love, kept him from shaking it off. He hadn't seen her in weeks, not since that raw confrontation at the warehouse. The divorce papers were already in motion, a cold stack of legal jargon sitting on his kitchen counter, waiting for signatures. Yet the idea of Sarah, cast out by Ryan, picking up the pieces of her life alone, gnawed at him. He poured a glass of whiskey, the cheap kind that burned going down, and tried to focus on anything else. But his mind kept drifting back to their wedding, to Sarah's laugh under those backyard fairy lights, and how far away that night felt now. Sarah, meanwhile, was unraveling. After Ryan's blunt announcement that he was engaged to someone else, a barista he'd met 3 months ago, she'd packed her bags in a daze. His apartment, once a refuge, felt like a trap, every corner laced with memories of their betrayal. She moved into a cramped rental on the edge of Seattle, a place with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. Her days blurred into a grind of job applications. Barista, receptionist, anything to keep the lights on. Her sisters, still furious about Ryan, offered no sympathy, and her parents' disappointment hung over every stilted phone call. "You made your choice," her mom said once, her voice sharp. Sarah didn't argue. She'd lost Jacob, lost Ryan, and lost whatever version of herself she'd been before it all fell apart. One evening, desperate for a distraction, Sarah wandered into a bookstore, the kind with creaky floors and overstuffed shelves. She used to lose hours in places like this with Jacob, debating whether Bradbury or Orwell had the sharper pen. Now, she stood alone, tracing her fingers over book spines, feeling like a ghost in her own life. On impulse, she bought a worn copy of The Great Gatsby and started reading it at a nearby cafe. The story of chasing impossible dreams hit too close, and she shut the book when her eyes started to sting. She texted Jacob, "Can we talk?" Just once. "I owe you that," but the message sat unanswered, marked as read. Jacob, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild. He'd started going to a gym near his apartment, less for fitness and more to burn off the restless anger that still flared when he thought of Sarah and Ryan. A co-worker, Lena, began joining him for coffee breaks, her dry humor pulling him out of his head. She didn't pry, didn't push, but her presence was steady, a reminder that life could still hold something good. One night, over beers at a dive bar, Lena asked about Sarah. Jacob hesitated, then spilled the whole story, the betrayal, the fight, the divorce papers. Lena listened, then said, "Sounds like you're carrying her weight in yours. Maybe it's time to let hers go." The words stuck, but letting go felt like betraying the part of himself that still loved Sarah, even now. Back at her rental, Sarah was sinking. The job hunt was brutal. Rejections piled up, and the ones that called back offered minimum wage for soul-crushing hours. She'd stopped texting Jacob after the 5th unanswered message, each silence confirming she'd burned that bridge to ash. One night, alone with a bottle of wine in her thoughts, she scrolled through old photos on her phone. Her and Jacob at a music festival, grinning under a sunset. Her and Ryan as kids, covered in mud after a rainstorm. She deleted Ryan's photos one by one, but paused on Jacob's. She wanted to hate him for shutting her out, but she couldn't. She'd broken something sacred, and the weight of it was crushing her. Then, a small break. A local library hired Sarah as a part-time clerk. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a tether to something stable. On her first day, she shelved books with a quiet focus, the rhythm of the work soothing her. But during a break, she overheard a coworker mention a mutual friend who'd seen Jacob at a bar with a woman, laughing, looking lighter than he had in months. The news hit Sarah like a punch. She excused herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, trying to breathe through the realization that Jacob was moving on. She wanted to be happy for him, but all she felt was loss, and a flicker of determination to claw her way back to something resembling a life. Sarah's new job at the library became her lifeline, a small anchor in the storm of her unraveling life. The work was quiet, shelving books, helping patrons find obscure titles, organizing community readings, but it gave her days structure, something she hadn't realized she'd been craving. She'd smile at coworkers, make small talk about the weather or the latest bestseller, but the ache in her chest never dulled. At night, alone in her dingy rental, she'd sit on the sagging couch, The Great Gatsby still unopened on the coffee table, and wonder how she'd ended up here. No husband, no Ryan, no family to lean on. Her parents' calls had dwindled to once a week, their voices heavy with unspoken judgment. Her sisters didn't bother hiding theirs, texting her things like, You really thought Ryan was worth it? She didn't have an answer. Not for them. Not for herself. Across town, Jacob was carving out a new rhythm. His studio apartment, once a bleak crash pad, started to feel like his own. Books on the shelves, a secondhand rug to warm the floor, a coffee maker that didn't sputter. Lena, his co-worker-turned-friend, was a steady presence, her sharp wit and easy company pulling him towards something resembling hope. They'd grab drinks after work, splitting fries and trading stories about bad bosses or old road trips. One night, Lena leaned across the bar table, her eyes steady. "You're not that guy I met 6 months ago, Jacob. You're not stuck anymore." He wanted to believe her, but signing the divorce papers, still sitting on his counter, felt like crossing a line he wasn't ready for. Sarah's face, shocked, tear-streaked, tumbling off Ryan that night, still haunted him, not just with anger but with a strange, lingering sorrow. Sarah, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild, brick by fragile brick. She started therapy, scraping together the cash for a sliding-scale counselor who listened without judgment. Talking about Ryan was the hardest, untangling the cousin who'd been her rock as a kid from the man who'd upended her marriage. "I thought he was safe," she told the therapist, voice cracking. "Like family could never hurt you." The counselor nodded, jotting notes. "Family can hurt the deepest, Sarah, because you let them in." The words stung, but they were true. She started journaling, filling pages with memories, regrets, and questions. Why had she let Ryan blur the lines? Why hadn't she seen Jacob's pain sooner? The answers didn't come, but the act of writing felt like a small rebellion against despair. One rainy Saturday, Jacob ran into Sarah's dad, Tom, at a hardware store. Tom looked older, his shoulders slumped, a shadow of the man who'd clapped Jacob's shoulder after the betrayal came to light. "She's trying, you know," Tom said, gripping a paint can. "Got a job, seeing someone to sort her head out. But she misses you. Doesn't say it, but I see it." Jacob nodded, unsure what to say. He didn't hate Sarah, not anymore, but the idea of seeing her again felt like stepping into a minefield. "Thanks for telling me," he managed, then walked away, the encounter leaving him unsettled. That night, he finally signed the divorce papers, his hand shaking as he scrawled his name. He mailed them the next morning, feeling both lighter and heavier, like he'd shed a limb. Months later, Sarah stood at a crossroads. She'd save enough for a better apartment, one with windows that didn't leak and a view of a park where kids played soccer. She'd made a friend at the library, a quiet woman named Claire who invited her to book club, where Sarah found herself laughing for the first time in ages. But the loneliness lingered, a quiet ache that flared when she saw couples holding hands or overheard someone mention a happy marriage. She didn't regret the divorce. She'd broken something irreparable, but losing Jacob felt like losing a piece of her soul. Losing Ryan, though, was different, like frostbite that left her numb. She heard he'd married his barista, moved to Portland, and she felt nothing, just a hollow relief that he was gone. One evening, Jacob was at the same bookstore Sarah had wandered in a month before. He was looking for a gift for Lena, who'd just gotten a promotion. As he scanned the shelves, he spotted a familiar figure, Sarah, thumbing through a poetry collection, her hair tucked behind her ear like always. His heart lurched, but he didn't move. She looked different, thinner, maybe, but steadier, like she'd found her footing. For a moment, he considered saying something, offering forgiveness or at least closure. But then she turned, their eyes met, and she froze. Neither spoke. Sarah gave a small, sad smile, then walked away, disappearing between shelves. Jacob stood there, the book in his hand forgotten, knowing that was the end, not with a fight or a tear, but with a quiet, final goodbye. What does it mean to start over when the past won't let go? For Sarah and Jacob, the story ends here, but the echoes of their choices will linger, shaping whatever comes next.